where the online feed is at. I'm Andrew Brown, I'm Director of Policy and Impact at Demos, and Demos, as I'm sure you know, is an independent cross-party think tank set up around 30 years ago, and at the core of our work has always been around building an inclusive economy, and that means giving everyone the opportunity to participate in our economy, whether that's through work, whether that's through entrepreneurship, whether that's through contributing, volunteering, and kind of innovating their communities. And critical to that is helping younger people get on the right pathway at the beginning of their lives, so they can kind of get the skills that they need, the experiences they need, and flourish and develop the opportunities that they seek. So when we talked with the Foundation about collaborating on a piece of work and exploring the impact of one of the government's initiatives to try to improve the economic prospects for young people, the youth hubs, we were very excited by that opportunity. Andrew's put together, I think, a really exciting report which you have copies of here, and you can also download online. I feel like when I started working in the policy space, far too many years than I care to remember, youth employment and unemployment was quite a big deal. It was about 2010, we were just in the great financial crisis. You know, it felt like every week David Cameron was making a speech about NEETs or young people, etc. But over the past few years, it feels like its prevalence in the political debate has somewhat reduced, and I think that's partly because we have been successful in supporting more young people into work, and youth employment rates in the UK are not what they are in other parts of the world, for example. But also, I think there's been a greater focus on other parts of the market, particularly older workers, which we've also done work at Demos recently. But I do think it's important, given the long-term productivity challenges and economic challenges we have, to refocus back on this issue, actually, because as I think Andrew's report brilliantly highlights, you've got nearly 1 million people not in education, training and work at a time we've got a labour shortage of around 1 million workers. We have industries of the future we're trying to create. The new government's got very ambitious missions around clean power, around fixing the NHS and social care. These will require a new way of working. We simply can't afford to ignore people who are essentially moving into the prime of their economic lives and not giving the opportunities they require. And so we're absolutely delighted to do this piece of research and delighted to bring together, I think, a brilliant panel with a lot of great range of university expertise, which will hopefully inform this conversation. So the format will be, I think Andrew's going to give us an overview of the research. I'm then going to go to the panellists, and I'll introduce them each in turn and ask them to give their kind of reflections and thoughts about it. Then I'll open up to you, the good audience, and then we'll do the Q&A, and then we'll conclude at the end. And hopefully we'll be finished around 11:15. Although looking at the energy and enthusiasm in the room, I think we might have quite a lot of questions. So we'll see whether we'll really get it on time. But we'll try and get you away as close to that 11:15 deadline as possible. So without much further ado, Andrew, I will pass it over to you to tell us about your excellent report.
Great, thanks. I'm just going to move the microphone over here so that it picks me up. Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Yes, to introduce myself as well, I'm Andrew Phillips. I'm a senior researcher at Demos. I lead our employment and skills research and policy. And yeah, really excited to be launching this report today. Thanks to Youth Futures Foundation for supporting it. And I also want to thank all the people who took part in the research, people who contributed to our call for evidence, who took part in interviews, who helped us visit different youth hubs in England. Massive thanks to them. This research wouldn't have been possible without all those people participating and helping us along the way. And I also want to thank my colleagues at Demos, and especially my colleague Naima, who is my co-author of this report. Sadly, she can't be here today, but has worked on the project throughout with me. Yeah, special thanks to her for all of her work on it. So in my kind of opening remarks, I'm just going to cover kind of 3 areas. So a bit about the context, why this issue of employment among young people matters now. Then I'm going to talk through our research on youth employment hubs that's kind of cover some of the main points that we're making in the report. And then I'm going to talk about our recommendations for the future, and that's you'll see that the report is titled "The Future of Youth Employment Hubs," and that's because we kind of wanted in the project to think about how to improve them and build on them going forward. And so I'll talk about some of our recommendations around that. So if I start with the kind of context, as Andrew mentioned, there are about 900,000 young people who are not in education, employment or training, NEET. So that's 1 in 8 young people in that age group. and that's the highest rate since 2015. And there are lots of different reasons, but I'll pick out three specifically that we think new government coming in should make an effort to tackle this issue. So first is the long-term impact that it has on people's lives. So research has shown that missing out on employment or educational training at a young age, particularly that kind of transition from full-time education into the world of work, can have a really quite severe negative impact on people, kind of both in the sort of short-term immediate outcomes for in the next few years of their lives, but also well down the line, research has shown negative impacts 20 years later for people. And so providing support to people while they're at sort of late teenage years into their early 20s makes sense, because the potential is there to improve people's life outcomes for decades into the future. A second important reason is that the groups of marginalised young people or young people from socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds are more likely to be in this position. So things like having no qualifications, having a mental health condition, having had experience with the care system, for example, we know these are risk factors that increase the chances of young people being NEET. And those are groups of young people who are more likely to need some additional support to help them make that transition from education into employment. And then third, we know that the new government's key mission is to increase economic growth, and some previous research that Youth Futures Foundation did with PwC showed that if the UK matched Germany for its rate of the proportion of young people who are NEET, that would contribute £38 billion to UK GDP. And so for a government that wants to make economic growth its number one mission, this is an area that it shouldn't ignore. There are some indications that the new government does recognise the importance of this issue. So actually, we hosted an event earlier this year where Liz Kendall spoke, who was then Shadow Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, and she spoke about Labour's plans to support young people. And then in the Labour Party's manifesto, they committed to introducing a youth guarantee, so access to training and apprenticeship or support to find work for all 18 to 21-year-olds. So we really welcome that commitment. I think it's a really positive step, but clearly the government's going to need to develop a plan to deliver that guarantee. And we think youth employment hubs, which is the focus of the research, can and should be part of that plan to deliver that guarantee. So I'll talk a bit about our research now. Just to sort of briefly mention the research methods we used. As I mentioned, we ran a call for evidence where we invited people to submit evidence to us. We conducted site visits to 6 different youth hubs in England, where we spoke to practitioners. We also ran focus groups with young people while we were there at the hubs. And we also conducted a whole series of online interviews with people, as well as a roundtable with wider stakeholders. So DWP started setting up youth employment hubs in 2020, and now there are over 100 of them across England, Scotland and Wales. We think that they've kind of gone a bit under the radar in terms of as a government programme, and that's why we were really delighted to partner with Youth Futures Foundation to research them. And this is the first major research report to be published about them that's kind of in the public domain. So I should start with kind of what is a youth employment hub. So they are shared spaces separate from job centres, with DWP Youth Hub work coaches working alongside partner organisations, such as local authorities, charities, training providers, FE colleges, providing access to a kind of range of employment-related services in one location. They're also sometimes called youth hubs, and the reason we've called them youth employment hubs is to make clear that they're different from a separate commitment in the Labour Party's manifesto to set up a network of young futures hubs. Okay, so don't get confused. You've got to make sure you keep in mind the difference. Youth employment hubs, they are aimed mainly at the age group 16 to 24. Actually, when we spoke to practitioners, they said predominantly they support young people in kind of 18 to 24 age group. Young futures hubs, on the other hand, are aimed at children and teenagers. So kind of different age group they're serving there. So they keep the difference clear. Hopefully that helps. So what makes youth employment hubs kind of distinctive? There are kind of two key factors really. So providing support to young people at a location that isn't a job centre. So that's one of the main distinctive factors. Most young people using them are typically young people receiving universal credit and who would otherwise get support at a job centre. But in the youth employment hub model, their work coach refers them to a hub instead of getting support at a job centre. And then the other kind of main distinctive factor is this idea of kind of co-location of multiple services. So youth employment hubs have at least one youth hub work coach who's employed by DWP, working alongside a range of other organisations, and that setup varies quite a lot depending on the individual hub. So we think this initiative is really positive based on all our research, and I'll mention kind of three specific reasons for this. So the first is that when we spoke to young people in focus groups especially, they were really positive about the buildings, the physical environment of the hubs compared to job centres. So that was it came through really strongly as a theme that young people much preferred getting support in the context of a hub rather than a job centre. They kind of typically use words like kind of welcoming, friendly to describe a hub, and contrasted this with the kind of more formal setup of a job centre. Or sometimes they said they found it kind of intimidating, mentioning kind of like security guard on the door, that kind of thing, that finding that not so easy to access. One young person said, going to the job centre it was very formal, but coming here to the hub it feels much more welcoming. The second point is around what we call relational practice. So a really consistent conclusion from lots and lots of evaluations of different types of employment support is that a strong, trusting relationship between the coach or advisor and the young person is crucial for improving outcomes. And that's really happening at youth employment hubs. We heard both practitioners and young people talk about the kind of really positive long-term relationship that they've developed, where they were able to build up trust and able to have a kind of deeper conversation where young people were able and willing to kind of open up about difficulties or challenges they were facing. And we were really impressed also just with the dedication of the practitioners we met working at hubs. They were really, many of them were really going above and beyond to support young people. And then third, the hubs really facilitate kind of stronger partnership working between different organisations. So one of the criticisms that we've made at Demos in previous research is that the landscape of kind of employment support services is very fragmented. There's a lot of separate organisations without enough coordination between them. Now, youth employment hubs don't solve that, but they do make it better. They definitely improve the situation by facilitating different organisations working together more effectively. And actually, one of the things that is good about them is that they actually vary quite a lot from one hub to another is quite different depending on the setup, depending on which kind of partner organisations are involved. And we think actually that's a real strength rather than a weakness of the programme, that it actually is flexible. Local partners have shaped it quite differently in different places. And actually, DWP should be given real credit for that, enabling that kind of local, flexible approach is really good. Of course, as with any new initiative, it's only been around a few years. There are definitely some challenges facing youth employment hubs in the future, and that brings me on to my third section on our recommendations. So we have a series of recommendations in the report. Some are aimed at central government, some at regional and local government, some at kind of managers and practitioners at the hubs themselves. So read the report for full detail on all of those. But I'm going to mention kind of three recommendations specifically, focusing on the kind of central government side because we are here in Westminster, and so that's what I'm going to focus on. So the first one is about funding. Future funding for this network of hubs is really uncertain. Many face a cliff edge in March 2025 as things like UK Shared Prosperity Fund comes to an end at that point. And this was a real concern for managers, for practitioners about frankly the survival of the hubs moving forward. One of the really valuable things that they've built up is that kind of partnership working between organisations. They're beginning to develop a reputation as kind of local institutions, it would be a real backward step to kind of lose them at this point. So our recommendation is that Treasury and DWP and the now renamed Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government should work together to commit 100 million annual funding to hubs in the 2024 autumn budget stroke spending review when that comes in the autumn. We think the current budget is around somewhere in the region of 25 million. That's our own estimate because we don't have precise figures. So why are we recommending that kind of funding increase? Because we think youth employment hubs are really good and we want to see them expand. There are about 120 of them at the moment, but they're not kind of evenly distributed across the whole country. And so that funding package would allow an increase to about 350 hubs. And we've based that on the idea that we think the aim should be that every job centre should be able to refer young people to a youth hub, and that every local authority should have access to one as well. So when fully set up, that network could support around 70,000 young people each year. And as we mentioned, 900,000 young people who are NEET, so supporting 70,000 in a year is very achievable and would definitely benefit those young people. The second is a kind of related point on funding, but specifically we think that in partnership between DWP combined authorities using that funding, they should work together to create 3-year funding agreements for youth employment hubs. Many of them run on 12-month funding agreements at the moment, and we were told that causes a lot of problems. So it's too short, it causes uncertainty. Staff end up on kind of temporary 12-month contracts, which gives them no job security. We had a number of times about staff leaving because they were worried about their job, in a month or two's time when funding ran out, and that kind of really disrupts the support young people get from the hubs, as well as we're losing kind of the skill and expertise that those practitioners are building up. So 3-year funding agreements would provide kind of greater stability and importantly really enable people working in the hubs to focus on delivery and improving outcomes rather than worrying about is it going to exist in 2 or 3 months' time. And then the third recommendation is that we think all youth employment hubs should be what we call open access, so providing support to all young people in the area, not just those receiving universal credit. Now, some hubs already operate with that model, so and we visited a number of ones that did, so we know that can happen successfully already. Some, however, run on a model where the only young people who get access to them are those referred by a job centre. And it's still helpful for them, but the context is that 2/3 of young people aged 18 to 24 who are out of work don't receive universal credit. So that's 2/3 of that group who currently would be excluded from getting support in many, depending on where they live, in many places. And so we think opening up access would be really helpful, would increase the number of young people who can access this kind of support and advice. And it's also essential to deliver that youth guarantee that's in the Labour manifesto, where they're committed to providing support to find work to all 18 to 21-year-olds. So our proposed 100 million funding includes funding for additional capacity to support young people who are not receiving universal credit but would nonetheless benefit from getting that support. So to wrap up, we think the new government should recommit to youth employment hubs, and actually we think they can take inspiration from the success of Sure Start. So youth employment hubs could be thought of as a kind of Sure Start for youth employment. Sure Start centres provided co-located holistic support to families with children under 5, and recent Institute for Fiscal Studies research showed that actually that had improved GCSE grades for children from disadvantaged areas 10 years or more after getting support from a Sure Start centre. And we think likewise, youth employment hubs also providing co-located holistic support to young people can also improve people's careers, their earnings, their well-being, in the long term, and also, ultimately boost economic growth and productivity, which will actually benefit us all in the long run. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And yes, sounds like there's a lot of hubs around as well. So it's good to kind of delineate and focus on what we're talking about here today. As I mentioned, we've got a delightful panel of speakers as well, with also real expertise in this issue. We've got Helen Dern from West Midlands Supply Authority, Interim Director of Employment, Skills, Health and Communities, which is a very long.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah. What a lot of work.
Yeah.
And also some experience working in DWP as well, which is fantastic for what we're talking today. Councillor Marcia Wood-Cameron, who is a cabinet member for economic inclusion at Lambeth Council. I'm really delighted you could be here to know how busy you will be as well at the moment. And Barry Fletcher, Chief Executive Officer at Youth Futures Foundation, who without them we would not all be here today. So thank you very much. And if you don't know Youth Futures Foundation, are a work centre looking at helping particularly disadvantaged and marginalised young people, and doing some fantastic work in this space. So a lot of expertise, a lot of experience on the panel. I'm going to start with you, Helen, first. That's all right, and then I'll come to Marcia and I'll come to you, Barry. And just your thoughts on the report, but also just your general reflections around the kind of issue you're talking about.
Okay, so good morning, everybody. My name's Helen Dern, and for the last 7 weeks I have been the Interim Director of Employment Skills and all the rest of it at the West Midlands Combined Authority. But for 5 years before that I was the Director of Services for DWP in the West Midlands, and also led a lot of the operational input for youth hubs right from day one. So I'm sitting here feeling like a very proud mob at the moment because everything that has come out of this report most probably was where we would have loved youth hubs to go to and progress to over the period of time that we've been operating them. It hasn't always been easy, to be perfectly honest with you, to get to where we find ourselves today. And the key has to be the working in partnership aspects of why youth hubs have made progress. There is an awful long way to go still, and a lot of that will be born out of hopefully some of the recommendations, because funding, yes, longer term stability, yes, inclusion of more partners and providers has to be the way forward. The needs of young people today are different to what they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And no one organisation, I don't believe, has the answer to this, and that's why we have to come together and work as one to provide that solution. But I love the recommendations, and I am very, very pleased to be part of the panel today, and I'm happy to take any questions when we move to that.
Great, thank you so much. Marcia.
Marcia Cameron, Cabinet Member for Economic Inclusion. Before that, I had the brief of healthier communities, so I dealt with mental health, disability, carers. So I welcome the report, and I agree with the findings that there's young people that we're not reaching, that miss out, and those are the ones that engage with the youth offending service. And so we are working more with them in Lambeth. We originally had 4 hubs across the borough, but what we found with the hubs was, the learning was, that young people were coming into the service at a very low skill level. They didn't have basic maths and English. Some of them had mental health issues, communication issues. Like, I don't know if you know, some young people have their own dialect language and acronyms that they use that can't be transferred sometimes into the employment field. So in Lambeth, what we found is we evolved the hubs into more a targeted approach. So having teams around the young people so that we upskill them in terms of communication, basic maths and English, and the skills that they need to at least go on the first step of employment or training. And one of the things that you said, Andrew, was using different ways instead of job centres in, engaging with young people in terms of employment. And one of the things in Lambeth, well, quite a few, we're using different initiatives, and one of them is we found that you've got to engage with children a lot earlier. You've got to go into the schools a lot earlier, not when they're ready to leave, but a lot earlier. And so one of our initiatives is we're putting the barbers in the schools, because what we found is young people talk more to their barbers. They go to barbers, and then we're training our barbers in those soft skills to deal with them in if they've got mental health issues, identifying it, or any other needs that they have, how to identify it. And we found that this is working really well. It's something that they would really like. They don't have to pay for it, free haircut. So I guess that's one of the ways, and we're looking at different initiatives. Oh, sorry, I've got a really soft voice, sorry.
And that microphone won't boost it either.
I'll just mention, I won't go into too much details. There are a few ways in which we've extended our offer. I'll just get it. Okay, so we've got Lambeth Made Unheard Voices program, and it's 6 months employability program to raise children's aspirations and to support them to overcome barriers and move closer to the labour market. We've got Next Us, which is a pathway into creative careers. It aims to open pathways into creative and digital industries for marginalised children. We've got Lambeth Made Create Your Future summer programme for 16 to 19-year-olds who are facing complex barriers to employment. But we've got a lot more initiatives in Lambeth. I won't go through them all. One of the things we did with our SEND young people, we had a reverse job fair. Have any of you heard of that? A reverse job fair where young people would have their stalls, a little bit about themselves and their training, and employers would come to their stalls and talk to them. So we had someone sign in for those who had hearing challenges, and it worked really well, and some of them gained training and employment opportunities doing it that way. And I think it gave the employers a real sense of what those young people could offer.
Thank you very much. Great to get those kind of practical on-the-ground examples of some of the issues taking place. Barry, your thoughts on this topic? You commissioned this work, obviously you were very deeply involved in helping us to frame it, so I know obviously it's the area of interest, but yeah, what do you think about both the topic and the report?
Thank you, Andrew. So firstly to say, we thought it was a really interesting report, great research to be done in this area, and I think the key point there is that a really important initiative that previous government set up around COVID. So I think it's important to identify that this was done at a time when there was real concern about growing youth unemployment around COVID, and some of it came out of some of the interactions there, and we were actually involved in talking about that. We wrote a paper about some of the examples of youth hubs in other countries and other places, and some of the evidence review on that. And what that showed is that this type of approach works, that it works because of that, I suppose, relational aspect, but also that accessibility. And I think we have to acknowledge that even though we might want that to be slightly different, for lots of young people, the job centre is not a place that they would naturally go to. And also the critical point is that so many young people are not claiming benefits, or certainly not claiming UC, and that's actually about 500,000. So we're talking the majority, and therefore a service that is structured solely around the job centre is unlikely to reach the vast majority of young people who need that support. And we know that if you give young people support, our Youth Employment Toolkit highlighted that actually you can make a difference and you can see more young people go into work. And at a time where we have 900,000 young people who are not in education, employment or training, that's something that we have to solve and we have to address. And so we thought it was a really interesting piece of work. We think the recommendations are really, really sensible. As you might expect, everyone's always asking for more funding for different things, and that is always a challenge, and we're very realistic about that. But as Andrew highlighted, the economic prize from this is significant. So we highlighted there the work we've done with PwC which was 38 billion, we actually did some further work that looked at if we could get our rates of NEET to the lowest in the OECD, that we could see 69 billion benefit to the economy, which would be the Netherlands. So we think the Netherlands should be our goal, not to become the Netherlands, but to reach the NEET rate of the Netherlands. And we think that would mean that we'd only have NEET rate in just over 4%. And that really would be transformational for young people. It would mean that the vast majority of young people are coming out of school, moving into work in a smooth and positive pathway. And unfortunately, that just does not happen for enough young people today. And we don't give young people enough support to do that. So we think the recommendation is really sensible. We think there's huge opportunity for youth hubs. We were delighted to see the youth guarantee in the manifesto. That was something alongside members of the youth employment group that we were calling for. But we think to deliver that, the key thing will be how you access those young people who are not, for example, claiming benefits at the moment, certainly not on UC. And we think youth hubs can be not the only part of that solution, but a part of the solution to how you do that. But at their current scale, they're unlikely to make a big difference to that, whereas at the scale that's been talked about in the report, they have a real chance of doing that, and that's something we're really positive about.
Thank you very much, Barry. Use the chair's privilege and ask the panel a few questions, and then we'll kind of broaden it up. I'll kind of go in reverse order, so sorry, Barry. I didn't see what it's really interesting you make that point about, I guess, the kind of the funding situation. There's going to be a lot of priorities kind of being pushed towards the Chancellor. I guess, do you think we've somewhat taken our eye off the ball on youth unemployment in the past few years in the UK? You mentioned during COVID there was quite an uptick in it, but it feels like we sort of moved back into, we talk about economic growth, we talk a lot about investment, but the kind of skills of workforce seem to somewhat dissipate in terms of its prioritisation. Do you think this is getting level attention needs? And if you don't think it is, kind of what do you think we could be doing more to kind of raise this up the agenda?
So firstly, we don't think it's getting the attention it deserves. I think there has been a view, because it isn't as bad as some places, that it's good, and that's not our view, and I don't think that should be the view, because 900,000 young people is a huge number of young people. It's also, and just to be really clear, it's much higher in some parts of the country's numbers. So when we think about how we look at regional disparities and local disparities, it's significantly higher. So it's almost double the rate in the northeast, for example, than it is in, say, the southwest. That is the reality at the moment for this, and it isn't, I think, something that's got all the attention it should do. Yes, there was a big focus on it during COVID when there was a massive concern it was going to rise massively, and I think, to be fair, real credit to the previous government that they did do something at that time. Things like creating youth hubs, the wider youth offer, Kickstart, etc., really made a difference, and they invested heavily in it. So 1.6 billion was spent on Kickstart, but as soon as the immediacy of the COVID risk went away, all of that funding was pulled from some of those areas. And although I'm not necessarily advocating for something exactly the same as Kickstart now, I think the attention on the issue dropped. I think there's a couple of things that can be done. One is, I think we should, and I think the Youth Guarantee is a great starting point for that, but we could also set a more ambitious goal. So what do we want it to get to? What do we want our youth unemployment rate to be? What does good look like? We think lowest in the OECD is a good starting point. We think that's really ambitious. We think that takes a long time. We think that takes probably 20 years to do that, because you have to change the system fundamentally. Everything from transition from school and careers, everything to apprenticeships. We need to change what employers are doing to recruit more young people. But setting an ambitious goal, I think, would be key. And then, of course, backing that up with investment. But I don't think it's quite as much investment as sometimes people. So there are lots of areas where just more money is needed. I think actually this is an area where we could spend the money better. There is investment in some of these areas. It's not always particularly well directed, and it's certainly not always particularly well directed at those who need the money most. So as you might expect, we have lots of other points around this, but I think they would be the critical one. Set something ambitious, and then see this as something that really drives economic growth. Because if we want to drive economic growth, we need labour supply. Labour supply and productivity are the two things that drive economic growth. At the moment, on labour supply, we have a massive challenge. There's lots of evidence that it is much more likely to be successful in helping young people in early parts of their careers to get a role than it is to bring people back into the workforce much later in their careers. It It also gives you just a long-term benefit. You get 40 years of benefit from doing that, rather than a smaller number of years of benefit later on. So the cost to the exchequer are much higher if you don't do it, and the benefits are much greater.
And also businesses don't want to invest in countries with those labour market shortages as well. So, you know, I think I definitely think you're right, the balance in between the supply and demand side definitely has, I think, got a bit askew, and I think that's why this report's timing. Marcia, I mean, lots of fantastic initiatives you're doing in Lambeth. Do you think central government and DPP and some of those structures really, is there enough collaboration taking place between the central and the local, and kind of backing and supporting some of those local initiatives? I think something comes out very strongly from Andrew's report and the kind of the experience we had at Youth Hubs is everything's so context specific. When you're talking about some of the communities you were working with in Lambeth, you can't really necessarily map that out from a central level. You need to kind of have that on the ground expertise. Do you think there are better ways of really encouraging collaboration between the universal structures? You know, we're always going to need job centres, we're always going to need, you know, UC and other kind of social security systems operating at a national level, but more could be done to help you guys interact with that and adapt and work in partnership. I mean, what's your sense of how central government use some of the work you're doing with that?
Well, I think it's really great that we've got a Labour government now.
I thought you might say.
And Liz, you know, we're making changes as we promised, and Liz Kendall was speaking today, I think, on the report, and she was saying about how she's going to launch, you know, Labour's 10-year plan in jobs and employment and skills. One of the things that she mentioned is devolving the services to a local level. So it's just what you said, making it more localised so that local authorities have more control of how they work with DWP, and I think that is groundbreaking, and it's June in the autumn, I think, as well. She mentioned that they're going to launch the white paper, so it's how organisations and you will feed into that white paper as well. So I think it's a 10-year plan. We can't undo 14 years, you know, of, you know, things that didn't quite work, you know, because we are in the situation we are now for various reasons. So yes, I think that Labour are at the forefront of this. They're taking it seriously, and if you can see the recording of what Liz is going to say today and feed into the white paper, I think it is getting now the attention that it needs.
I'm sure everyone in this room will be knocking on DWP's door. Andrew's probably got one on speed dial already. But it's absolutely, they just feel like it's a good opportunity, I think, to influence some of this new government's thinking on this. But I guess speaking of that, and kind of touching on what you just said, Marcia, about kind of devolutionaries, and then there's that everyone seems to be dumping everything at the mayor's doorstep. I mean, you're the kind of future for economic growth, you're going to solve all our infrastructure problems, you are going to, you know, reconnect public trust and confidence in the political system. You know, there's a lot coming the mayoralty's reign. You've got a new mayor, obviously, Richard Parker. What tools do you need, really, do you think? And I appreciate you're only 7 weeks in as well. But, you know, what's your kind of lay of the landscape? What role do you think the combined authorities can play and should play? And what kind of support do you need? Because it does look like Labour are going to put a lot of emphasis on yourselves to kind of drive this agenda.
So, having been on both sides of this fence, I think the biggest opportunity now is the way that the combined authorities can corral and bring the key players together. Not necessarily tell a geography what to do, but make sure that all of those who have an interest, all of the key stakeholders in a particular geography can come together and agree a plan forward. I can't tell you how much opportunity there is, because there is loads of it. And in the West Midlands, we felt for a long time that we had a great relationship, that our combined authority and DWP and lots of other partners were doing a great job. We were pretty proud of ourselves. What I would say now is that it's a drop in the ocean compared to what could actually be done. And some of that comes with money, but a lot of it comes, I think, with the partnership having a shared goal and having a shared ambition for the young people in their geography. because it is different everywhere. Even in the seven local authorities that make up the West Midlands Combined Authority, the problems are different in every single one of those. And then when you go down into ward level, they're different again. So one solution is not going to solve this. I also think then there is also the opportunity to think about the earlier stages that Moss was talking about, because what we're definitely seeing is young people coming out into the labour market with absolutely no comprehension about the world of work, with reading and writing attainment levels that employers will not entertain. They are not in a position to take up apprenticeships. We are doing all sorts to promote Path to Apprenticeship programme in the West Midlands, but we're struggling to get young people at the right educational level to be accepted by the employer. So there's something there for me about the employer's attitude alongside what we need to do earlier to help our young people be ready for the world of work. We're excited about the opportunity of more devolution. We really, really are. But the main government departments that support us in that have also got to be ready to come to the table and maybe think about some of the structures and the processes that they deliver, and maybe do those a little bit differently and give us the space to innovate and evolve some of that, and that the one size fits all for DWP in terms of what you're expected to do while you're in receipt of universal credit might need to be different in Birmingham to what it is in Port Talbot. Yeah, so it just really needs much more intelligence from the ground.
Yeah, one of the things I failed to mention was that we've got a skills and employment board, so we work in partnership with NHS Trust and our business improvement districts and all the huge big employers to look at ways in which we can have perhaps apprenticeships that they take, give us feedback. But one of the things that we found, as Ellen mentioned, is that young people, to go into the apprenticeship, we receive apprenticeship levy, and for them to go into the first level of apprenticeship, they haven't got the skills, they haven't got basic level 2, and employers won't take them on, as Ellen says, without that. So the apprenticeship levy is too rigid, we feel, and it needs to be more loose so that there's a step before they go on to be an apprentice where they're upskilled. So if that levy was more broad, then we could upskill them and get them ready to go on to the first level.
Can I just mention a couple of other points?
Yes, please.
Okay, so work experience is another major hurdle, which in West Midlands our mayor's just announced a pledge to create an extra 20,000 work experience placements to give young people that opportunity to see what the world of work is like. That needs to be far more coordinated, again, across all of the different partners in the geography. The growing sectors aren't necessarily the ones that our young people are hearing about from their families and from their schools, because actually the growth sectors in the green technology, for example, engineering for us in the West Midlands is growing rapidly, but the skill and what that really means in today's world is very different to what it was to, when we were building cars down at Longbridge. So, there is definitely a need to open the world up of work to our young people through work experience in the new sectors. But there are lots of other social issues impacting young people at the moment. And one of the things I talk about a lot in the West Midlands is we can put skills in front of lots of young people. We've got young people coming out of our colleges having done really great technical training, who then turn around and say, I'm not going to take that job because I've got no housing, I have debt problems, my parents feel that their well-being, their stability will be questioned if I take a job, what will happen to their benefit entitlement. And ultimately the growing, this is a bit of a pandemic I think, in young people's mental health. That whilst we think that getting the skill bit's going to help, there are all of these other social impacts that across government we've got to get better at understanding, I think, and being clear about how those are impacting on the decision making of young people.
I think it's going back to Barry's point as well about this being a kind of very long-term cross-governmental initiative. And I think it was Francis Fukuyama, the the goal of politics is to become Denmark, but maybe it's to become the Netherlands. And, maybe that target can be so we can galvanise that cross-governmental work and bring. Because you're right. I mean, I think it comes out from Andrew's report, but there's a multifaceted of issues which do need to be tackled there. Andrew, if I can put you on the spot as the kind of one of the report's authors, I guess we've talked about it kind of obliquely here, but business and the role of businesses in this. I mean, I think you can go back 110 years to reports from David Lloyd George and others moaning about businesses not doing enough to reach out to engage with young people, reskill, retrain them, keep them up to date. It feels like it's been a constant theme in kind of British skills policy for almost a century. The youth hubs, is there more we could be doing to bring the private sector involved in that? What can we do to make sure that ultimately, those who are creating, I say creating in a looser sense, but putting those jobs together, have some role in kind of helping to bridge the gap between those that have the most disadvantage and getting people they want. Have you got any thoughts on that particular issue?
Yes, definitely.
So make sure you bring the mic.
Yeah.
Otherwise, our recorded audience won't hear your words.
So we include a section in the report on this point actually. So we had a few good examples of kind of engaging with employers. So that's things like employers coming into a youth hub to offer an information session, to do a presentation for young people, to run mock interviews, for example. So I don't want to be entirely negative because we had a few good examples, but in general, the connections between individual youth employment hubs and employers are quite weak at the moment, was basically our conclusion. And that's clearly connecting the supply side and the demand side up is a long running problem in kind of running employment support programs in general. So we definitely need to do more on it. The specific recommendation we put in the report is to coordinate that kind of employer engagement between different youth hubs at a minimum. So one of the problems is that individually youth employment hubs are quite small by nature. They're quite they're small community-based hubs, and so it's not. I think just that our conclusion was at that scale they're just going to find it hard to engage with. Partly because it's hard to attract employers because they don't necessarily have a huge amount of people to speak to, frankly, but also because at the individual hub level, kind of staff capacity is really limited. People are really, really busy and have a gazillion things to do, and so employer engagement then often ends up being a side task for one member of staff. So our conclusion was coordinate that at a minimum across youth hubs in a given region. So I know, for example, that in Liverpool there's a kind of network of the youth hubs that is sort of they're kind of partnering together a bit. So there's an opportunity for that kind of thing. For example, providing a network of the different youth hubs, coordinating employer engagement between them. I think also for probably at the kind of combined authority level, there's probably more that can be done to coordinate employer engagement for young people more generally. And we also included a recommendation about connecting this up with the careers hubs, which is kind of helping connect schools with employers. And clearly those things can link up better. So that is that kind of coordination to bring, so that there's a bit more scale to it. And it's also, there's also just a point about making it easier for employers as well. So when I've interviewed employers for previous research that I've done, one of the things they've said is there's just like a baffling array of different organisations. Who do I speak to? I think if we could get to a place where there's maybe a clear point of contact for youth employment for it, so that employers know who to speak to as their point of contact, that could be really beneficial and help make those connections between the kind of grassroots, small community-based kind of hubs or other organisations, youth charities, up to the kind of larger scale employers, for example.
Yeah, just to add on to that, there's different ways of engaging with employers, and I know I mentioned the Employment and Skills Board, but Nicola is here, Nicola McLean, she leads on youth hubs, and we're going to launch our B Lambeth, and we're doing the B Lambeth Award. Nicola, would you like to quickly say what the B Lambeth Award is and how we engage businesses?
Yeah, try to be loud.
Just stand up.
Recording. Yes, as Marcia said, we've got the BLAMP Award, and they're all about kind of celebrating businesses as well as residents. The focus on businesses is around how they're supporting our residents into early careers, looking at their learning development, looking at how, you know, there's awards around sustainability, but we're moving away from our traditional business awards and looking more at how are the businesses in the borough and also outside of the borough supporting Lambeth residents, and that's really the key for us. And then it's not just about kind of getting an award, it's kind of what else can you offer? So some of those residents that will win awards, we're looking at, you know, with some of the business partners offering internships, offering work experience, all the things that we've talked about, and kind of getting businesses to value more the kind of early careers. So the hope is we'll keep developing the awards year on year, and businesses will recognise that actually it's really important for us to invest in the local labour market, and we're kind of offering them recognition for doing so.
Thank you. Great answers there. I also feel like there should be a recommendation about banning the word hub being used too much as well. I think you've made about 6 hub references. So maybe you can get the thesaurus or something. A recommendation. Over to you, good audience. You've been very patient listening to presentations and views. I'm sure there's a lot of questions out there. I can see one over there, one there. I'll take them in kind of groups of 2 or 3, and then I'll repeat them. Sorry for the recording, and then I'll go back and take another set. So I'll start with you there, and then that's one down there, and then one there. Do you want to start?
So we've joked a little bit about
Do you want to say who you are, by the way?
Oh, sorry,
your organisation as well?
my name's Sarah. I work at the Department for Education and I work on family hubs. See what I did there? Well, we've joked, haven't we, about how many hubs there are, but I've got a sort of a serious question here. There are, we work on family hubs, and I could name you about 5 different types of hubs that the Department for Education promotes. You guys have named about 3 or 4. How do we, and we've talked about the fragmentation of services, and we've talked about this kind of single pot, sort of specific funding and sort of short-termism of the kind of funding. How do you guys see devolution, or like local devolution, and a mission-led government solving this problem, kind of fragmentation, and we're all doing great things, but how does one combined local authority, how does one area, how does one ward begin to kind of wade through all of this, this kind of landscape?
A hub for hubs.
A hub for hubs.
No, it's a really good question, and again, I know Andrew's got some thoughts on that. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Diana Neal. I'm from London Councils. I just wanted to ask a question on data, because certainly we've done some research in this area, found it really difficult to get good public data, particularly at a local level, but also on things like hubs. So I guess my question is, we're supportive of the model, we think it's great, the partnership working, but how do we know that we are reaching those young people that we want to reach? How many are the hubs reaching, and is that quite important if we're going to make this case to government that we've got some good evidence base as well? So how can we improve the data? I think the other bit is, I think the report touches on it, like data sharing between organisations as well. So yeah, just it'd be great to get the panel's views on that.
It's great we have a what works section on the panel as well. So data and evaluation is the name of the game. Yes.
Connie Mattock from the Centre for Young Lives. I just had a question about young people with additional needs. It's been touched on a few times. I just wondered if you could talk a little bit more about how the hubs meet the needs of young people with poor mental health, with SEND, or in contact with the youth justice system, what the role of kind of that integrated co-located support is, and also kind of whether and how their experiences of accessing the hubs differs from their peers. Just if you could draw that out a little bit more, that'd be really helpful.
So we've got questions about the fragmentation and the proliferation of hubs and all the different elements, and also how we balance that with local variation and devolution. Something around data sharing and evaluation, how we make sure we know we're reaching the right people and we're doing a good job in helping those people. And then a question around how we tailor this to meet the kind of particular challenges facing groups like mental health, for example. I might ask Helen and Andrew to maybe talk a bit about the devolution and the fragmentation bit. Barry, I'll come to you on the data side, and Marcia, I'll talk to you about maybe that point around how we focus on the right groups and the diversity of kind of experiences that young people have. And then first, aren't you the problem? You're bringing more to it, devolution or fragmentation.
But I think what I've seen in these few weeks, and from my previous experience of working closely with West Midlands Combined Authority is that every local authority, every local partnership wants something different, or think that the answer is something different. So I think the first bit, if the devolution comes in the kind of money that we are hoping, is that we've got to understand the landscape of the geography, and that's data driven. So what do we know? What do we know about all of the young people who are coming through school, who are going to be leaving school, the attainment levels, the whole bit. And then we need to go to the community and ask them what else they think that they need. And I do believe that the local authorities have to play a really major part in supporting whatever that solution might be. And it might be that we do need a family hub in that location, but actually part of that family hub is a standing youth offer. Or it could be that a youth hub is the right answer, but I think every local geography will have a slightly different view. And one of the things I did learn from doing all this is, unless all of the partners have a shared common vision about what it is they're doing and why they're doing it, using whether it be the blueprint that we established right at the beginning of the youth hub piece of work when I was working with DWP, one of the key parts of that is actually what are our success criteria and how are we going to come round to deliver on that one thing or two things, whatever it might be. You know, telling them we need you to have a hub for this reason doesn't work. So it's got to come from the community itself, I think. We've also got to understand a little bit, I think, about the private business, how they can support in a location. Some big employers, some not so big. We've got loads of SMEs in the West Midlands who employ thousands and thousands of people, but their voice doesn't necessarily get heard. So how do you make sure that the key employers in a location are bringing everybody to the table? Like I said, I'm being on both sides of the fence now. I actually think more devolution is the way to go. I really do. Because locally, that's where you can make change happen. It's so slow from the centre. If we want to make things work quicker, we've got to do it because we have a passion for that geography, because we know that geography and we care about it, because my children and my grandchildren are the ones who are going to benefit if we get this right in the West Midlands. So, I think that's why devolution is important.
Andrew, you've put your name to a few documents talking about a universal work service, for example. So, do you think that perhaps that universality and making sure there's a standard offer everywhere, but it might be variable in terms of its configuration, is that how we solve the issue of fragmentation versus coordination versus consistency? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think the youth employment hubs themselves are quite an interesting example, because one thing I didn't mention in my presentation is the variability in where they're actually based. And so some of them are standalone buildings, but quite often they are actually kind of integrated into an existing organisation. So like a youth charity or a youth centre might host it, for example. So that's more of a kind of youth hub with a youth employment hub as part of it. And that I think can help reduce the fragmentation. Sometimes they're based in a kind of broader employment and skills hub that would actually be a kind of all-age service for anyone in the local area to access. I've visited a few examples like this where the youth employment hub is just like kind of one floor, one part of the building, that kind of thing. So I think those kind of things can help reduce the fragmentation by bringing things together in one place. It's probably also worth mentioning that we had an event with Chris Naylor, who's the former chief exec of Barking and Dagenham Council, in this room a few weeks ago, and they did some really. He was talking about some of the really interesting things they did around kind of community solutions in Barking and Dagenham, which was a kind of hub-like model, but bringing together lots of different services in one place. So that was kind of a whole range of different services, things that would come under kind of family hubs and children's services, as well as like housing, debt, and so on. So I think that's a kind of even more kind of let's bring a whole load of different services together and put them in one place kind of approach. And I think there's an essay he wrote for us which you can find online, but it was really successful in Barking and Dagenham. It actually kind of reduced costs for the council as well as providing better services to people.
Can I just add, that was the original concept of the youth hub, was actually that you would go and have access to whatever the barrier, support for whatever the barrier was. So if it was housing, if it was drug-related problems, debt, whatever it was, you would go there and those services would be available to you. So good on. But to get into that,
Joining up the
all
hubs
of them
and bringing
joining
them
up,
together
yeah.
and
So
having it's one hub and so hub and spoke, but young people don't come from nowhere and they're not living in isolation. They live in families who, as you said, can be a support but can also be a barrier. So I think we need to think more holistically and kind of, you're right that needs to happen at central government level as well as
and sorry, the other thing I didn't say was I think devolution would give us the opportunity to do longer funding deals. That's what I hope. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you for that. Barry, I feel like every policy report always ends with the cry for more data, better data, more data sharing. And that's all because it's true. What's your experience? Obviously, you guys kind of are doing a lot of work, researching, commissioning, understanding some of these problems. How do you crack that particular challenge you think here?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to say that a focus on transparency would be really helpful. So I think it's fair to say that on youth hubs there has been a very limited amount of information that's been published on them, and DWP have held some of that information and it hasn't always come out into the public domain. And I think I always understand that there are of course things that can't be shared in the public domain, but those things can be, because actually that awareness of what's happening and the understanding of that allows you to then test whether those things are working and for others to be able to contribute to that. And I think that's really important. That's not specifically related to DWP. I think that actually reflects on a broader challenge that we have. I actually think the data sharing bit is a really interesting one that came out in the report that I certainly saw when I used to be involved in delivering large-scale services, is that actually data sharing, and has been actually sometimes made more challenging by GDPR, is that actually that sometimes either is a definite issue or sometimes, very honestly, becomes a bit of an excuse for something that's quite hard. So it's really quite hard to do, but it's not impossible to do. And actually places can do it, and there are ways of getting the legal agreements and structures in place to do that data sharing, but it becomes something that becomes a blocker, and I think is a massive challenge for any of those types of services to really work well together. So it came across the employment hubs, but it exists for many of the different hub and shared services. It will be a massive issue. Devolution won't solve that in and of itself, because actually lots of that data is still held by individual government departments, and their willingness even to show it to each other is extremely challenging. Let's know, because for example, we don't know who those 500,000 young people are who are NEET. We know them from a survey that there's that many, and we know the people who are UC, but all the others, you nowhere could you actually definitively say who those people are. Now that is a massive issue. Now that's not impossible to solve through different government data sets, but is one that I think needs to really be focused on, and probably needs more investment in looking at it and how does that help you deliver better services to people, because sometimes this has come up with privacy issues, but fundamentally it's about how can that data sharing better services, because you can see from the Youth Employment Hubs report it is stopping them delivering better services, because a young person's having to explain every time they go to a different person what their situation is, and that cannot be a good and efficient way of doing it.
Yeah. Now, at the moment, if you have 3 different organisations working in the Youth Employment Hub, they don't share data with each other, and so the young person has to essentially sign up and register with each of them separately, even though they're working literally, on the next desk across in the building.
And also, it's nobody's real core responsibility either to do that. And I think that's always, that's why I think very briefly the government digital service working on creating that infrastructure. There's huge gains made very quickly. This kind of, I wouldn't say disappearance, it's still there, but it's sort of deprioritised, I guess. There has been a lack of political interest and responsibility around that key point, which is, how do you make this as smooth and seamless as possible?
Yeah, and I think there's been a sort of almost jump where we've kind of gone, right, now we need to think of how AI is going to solve those challenges for us, but we haven't actually done the bit before it, which is how do we make sure we have the data to allow us to undertake those things, because many of those kind of technological benefits will need to be based on good data to start with, and we haven't sort of done some of that piece. And I do agree with you. I think the lack of responsibility, or certainly focus, and it isn't necessarily all about lots of new tech and lots of new cost. It is actually about finding a path to say how can we share this better, how can we bring it. And I'm not saying putting it all in one place, because there's basic challenges around that, but I'm just talking about actually the willingness to do that and the focus on doing it.
Well, and the original focus on that was obviously cost savings as well. I mean, the whole drive towards this was there were so many people, basically so much inefficiency built in the system because of that lack of sharing. So this feels again that lesson's sort of been lost as well, which is there are huge kind of productivity gains we make in the public sector as well, just by doing some of that work effectively. Marcia, I mean, obviously every young person is different, and kind of there are so many challenges. We talk about housing, mental health, family background, for example. There might be those that have language background sometimes. I mean, are we doing enough, do you think, to make sure that we are creating or investing in services that can reach the people that really, really need it, and give them what they need in the form that they need it? And so what's your lessons learned from your experience in kind of Lambeth about how you can do that?
Yeah, well, in Lambeth we do have our challenges, as you mentioned, and what we look at is a more holistic, targeted approach. In Lambeth we have One Lambeth initiative where we work in partnership with our different departments, as you mentioned, housing, and also with our health partners, external partners. So we also look at pathways for young people so that they know the pathways into training and employment from the onset. And we need to, we're going to launch our Be Lambeth website, so do look out for that in the autumn. It's a plug. So that will show you a bit about our direction of travel. We also, I think we need to put more, because our work coaches, they have a really great challenge, and I think we need more expertise within them so that they can help the young people. But what we do is assess the young people so that we're familiar with their needs, and then we put in the services to support them. But I do think that there's a need to expand the work coaches so that they're actually travelling with the young people and they build up more of a rapport with them, and support them, and for someone that they can talk to about anything, their problems. But we do have them, but I see their role as being more, and if funding could go into developing them in their expertise, that would support those people that need more support.
Can I just add?
Yeah, sure.
So it's supposed to be the end of last year. We asked for all youth hubs to really understand how they could bring talking therapies in as a standing offer in every youth hub. Some took it on, some didn't, because at the end of the day this is about what the partnership thinks is the right thing to do, not what DWP at that time are telling them to do. So I know a lot did take that on, but it's not a standard offer everywhere. There are the action opportunities for the work coaches in hubs to also bring in support from specialist disability employment advisors that DWP have, which I know they use them extensively to support young people with disabilities. But there is a massive rising number of young people who are now in receipt of personal independence payment. I mean, it's just rocketed over the last few years. And I think that is an area where actually we do need to put some attention going forward to understand, is that where some of those young people are that we don't see, because they're reliant on that personal independence payment, and they think that's it, when actually you can work and get people at the same time. So there is information and knowledge sharing that needs to be done with a lot of those young people who are on personal independence payment. But it is an area where there's a lot to do. The SENS piece, massive as well. I just travelled down by accident with one of my team who's off to the House of Lords today, who is a disability athlete. You know, he relies on a wheelchair. He's really physically disabled. And one of the things he was telling me about is that actually so many young people are just losing out on real opportunity because there are no role models. There are very few people they can look to and go, actually, they look like me, I can do that, yeah, I might be in a wheelchair, but this is what I can do. So I think it's a great area, another area of great opportunity, but there is an awful lot more to do.
Thank you. Is there any other final questions? Take one more round. I see. Now we have that problem at the end. Everyone jumps in. I'm going to take three, I'm afraid. I'm going to take, you were up first, I think. You in the middle, and then, yes, you. Sorry, sir. But we are going to do some networking, so you won't be able to grab the panel at the end. But otherwise, we'll be here all day. Yes, sir. Do you want to start, and then? Yes.
Hello, thank you for the invitation to attend. I'm Hayman, I'm from the Recruitment and Employment Federation. One question is, how do you think recruiters can better work with youth employment hubs. And the second thing is we produce 3 jobs reports every month, so we do have a lot of data ourselves. We go after jobs data or occupation data. So you contact us if you're struggling for jobs data in a particular location.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, I'm Ankita. I work in an organisation called Social Finance, and we do a lot of thinking around systems change. And sorry for the big question, but I'm curious to understand whether you think youth hubs have led to genuine systems changes in areas. Have they kind of led to culture change in how services operate? Have they led to the prevention of young people becoming NEET in the first place? And do they contribute towards the sustainment of jobs after young people get the support? Because I think both of those things at either end are really important to help modify the system.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Bree Oliver-Moss. I'm ex lots of places, including DFE, but currently at McDonald's. I had a quick scan of your report, and it was really interesting, but what I didn't find was anything about impact. And I think it relates a little bit to what you're saying about in terms of the young people, and impact can be reached, but it can also be improved outcomes. And when we're thinking about improved outcomes, are we talking about employment or are we talking about careers? And for young people, those are multiple and different journeys that they can take. Is the ultimate aim of a youth hub just to get somebody a job, or is it a job that makes them feel good, improves their opportunities around housing, further education, ambitions in life? And is that the point at which we consider it a success? So for me, there was a lack of understanding what constitutes success, and for me, it's really important that it's beyond just reach. And so I'd be interested to hear what the panel thinks.
Yeah, there's just some quite they're in the same field, so I might take one more of the additional questions there. Actually, yes, you, Sarah, madam.
Yeah, so I'm Emma from Move On to Work, so you'll be familiar with our work. And I don't want to sound really controversial because I'd love to just get a genuine response. Is that you've talked about the numbers, the funding increasing, say from 25 million to 100 million, and that would allow you to 350 hubs. And basically, the figures then add up. The aspiration is going to be reaching less than 8% of the current NEET population, and we know that a huge amount of that NEET population used to be made up of people converted to the workforce, but increasingly post-COVID, it's actually people with multiple degrees and still can't get jobs. And my challenge is that we start removing some of the barriers to access, such as to stop those that most need getting access to youth hubs. Are we actually at risk of seeing an inundation of people that are kind of utilising youth hubs, meaning the most marginalised can no longer access those hubs? And again, it's just a challenge. I'd love them to have access to everyone, but yeah, if we start removing some of the barriers that protect most of them accessing them, do we risk pushing them away from their only support system that is currently there?
Some great questions there. So we had a question around recruiters and how they can help and get involved. A bit about systems change and outcomes and how to judge success in this area, and basically having an impact on that. And then I think really provocative but good question at the end around expansion. Does that dilute its kind of focus on the most marginalised, and does that take away support? Andrew, I might ask you to cover first of all those questions on the outcome side of it. I mean, what do we know essentially about the outcomes?
We don't have any outcomes data, or so the reports that we've published relies purely on qualitative research. I think there is definitely an opportunity for kind of impact looking at outcomes achieved in terms of data. I think in terms of your question about what are the key outcomes, I think my generalisation from lots of conversations with practitioners working at youth employment hubs is that their main focus is on helping young people move into work primarily. That's the kind of key outcome in their minds. I think that's sort of fair enough as a main outcome. But definitely kind of accessing skills, training, apprenticeships, level 2 English or maths. That's also an outcome that they're interested in and also want to achieve as well. So those are the main two I would say. I think there's probably less of a focus maybe on the kind of your question around kind of careers and the kind of longer term progression. I think that sometimes people spoke about it, but I think it's less of a focus would be my answer. And just to cover the point around kind of systems change and culture change, I think systems change, I think probably not, but I would basically be my answer, because I think they broadly work within the current structures, and it's broadly organisations doing what they already do but coming together to do it in one location. So I think it's definitely, but I think culture change, yes, because I spoke to a number of people who said to me, our partnership with UWP has changed because we've been taking part in the Youth Employment Hub. We now have a personal connection with the relevant manager of the job centre, this kind of thing. And also one of the things that I really struck me visiting several of them is that the sense of kind of team working among the different staff was really strong. So a sense that, you know, even though person, you know, 1, 2 and 3 work for organisation 1, 2 and 3, we're all part of the same team delivering support to young people in this particular hub. And that kind of sense of like team culture was that is culture change compared to those organisations delivering separately, and that is definitely facilitated by the Youth Employment Hub structure.
Yeah, I was just going to come on the impact points. So obviously this piece of research wasn't specifically designed to try and do that, partly because that data isn't necessarily available, and I think it comes back to some of the data availability. But obviously as a work centre, that's our goal. Obviously what we do with a huge amount of what we're doing, whether that be trials or wider things, I think there are definite opportunities to do some proper impact studies on youth employment hubs in the UK and to really understand whether they are delivering a better outcomes for young people than others. Now we think that would need, you know, trials to do that properly, but even if that's a starting point of having some good data on what they were delivering, that is obviously a point that's made in the report, is that actually at the moment that data availability isn't there to even give you the starting point to do that kind of impact. But we think that's hugely important, because I think you can accept that, you know, theoretically they work, and obviously the quality of data show that they make a difference and they definitely help with access, but I think access then, are they then, in terms of the actual services that people are receiving when they get there, delivering the impact we want to see? I think that's an open question and one that we need to answer.
If you want the money to continue to run, you need to demonstrate
Exactly.
it's making a difference in the short, medium and long term in terms of managing the views.
Absolutely, I fully agree.
Can I just add one other point, that I do think it has created an opportunity to show pathways to young people, but it does and has started with, how do we get you a job? And then how do you build from that? So one of the things that we're seeing in terms of how the makeup of the unemployment register now stands is there are quite a lot of young people who are unemployed but actually have a job. So they're actually doing 8 hours working at Tesco, or they're doing delivery, or they're doing something that's in their mind moved them into, I work now. They may still be receiving some financial support from the government, but they now see themselves in employment. But what worries me a bit about that is, how do you show to them that isn't it? There is a lot more out there. There is potential for so much more. So I do think there is more we can do in building those pathways towards whatever those growth sectors are, through boot camps, whatever it might be, that says you can do that and you can still do your 8 hours at Tesco, and we can help you build towards the kind of longer term career that you really want. So I see the point that you're making is absolutely very valid, that we have to show this is making fundamental and systematic change about how young people think they're going to interact with the establishment when they come out of school and move into the world of work. Yeah.
That question last year, and then perhaps on the kind of recruiters side, and kind of come back to that business point as well, just engaging that. I mean, what more do you think, you know, recruiters and that kind of, I guess, those kind of intermediaries in this space, who are kind of outside of the public sector, what more do you think they could do to see help some of these issues, if you have it also?
That's a really, really good question. I think recruiters, from the recruiter side, they need to look at the direction of travel that the local authority are going down in terms of their jobs and skill offer. If you're a business in the local area, then it's joining the business improvement district, which is made up of clusters of businesses where you have meetings and updates, talk about the apprenticeships, how they're going on. On Lambeth, we've got websites that try to engage with employers and show them what our offer is and where we need those skills. I know there's a lot of gaps in green skills, for example. There's not a lot of people that train in that area, and it's the entry level again that people need upskilling to be able to access that training. But I think for you, as organisation, you would all know that the people in the local authority that you need to engage with numbers, we've got BLAM reports, as I said, and that part of that is working in collaboration with businesses and employers. It's a really good question, and I think I'll go away and do more thinking.
So I'd just add, I think I'd really love you to have a two-way responsibility, both to your employer, the person that you're recruiting for, but also to the young people that you can bring to their attention. So, you know, sometimes we just take it on face value. The employer says they've got to have this and they've got to do that and they've got to be able to do this. And I think there is, you know, in a recruiting environment like the one you've talked about, a bit of challenge back to employers that actually, is that really needed? Would you not like to have a look at some young people and see whether you could work with them? How do you progress them through your organisation? So I think I'd like to see recruiters pushing back a bit at employers, but also coming and spending time in the youth clubs and seeing exactly the calibre and the talent and the aspiration of the young people when they get into an environment where they feel trusted and listened to, that it flows from them. And you know, you will find some really talented young people who you might give a chance to that you wouldn't have done if you'd have just looked at their CV.
It just reminds me, when looking at the employer skills survey a few years ago, there was a question asked. They were saying, you know, what do business employers think was the kind of key issue regarding the workforce, and they also having the right training and qualifications was what they wanted. And when you actually asked the second question about what the key factor of employing some people was, the skills and qualifications was not down there at all. Actually, just relevant experience and kind of skills that were transferable to the organisation. So there often is a gap, essentially, between what employers say formally they're looking for and what they're actually making their final decisions on. I think that's a really interesting point there. I guess the final question, quite an existential question really, I guess, which is, given that one of our main recommendations is expanding youth hubs and making more of an open door for people to come in. How do we make sure we keep that focus on the most disadvantaged and not just kind of cherry picking the easier cases, which sometimes does happen in government programs where already undertakes program. Andrew, have you got any kind of concluding thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I think, I mean, our argument is that the principle should be that if you want support, you can get some. I'm going to reference the work we published a couple of weeks ago that we called for more broadly across the kind of working age population, an employment advice guarantee that if you want advice, you can get some. I think that is a really important principle. I don't think that we should be excluding young people with a degree, for example, from getting some advice if they want some. I think that should be the basic operating principle we run on. I think there's a couple of things. So first of all, clearly at the level of the individual youth employment hub and the individual practitioner, there's a judgment to be made about how much support does this person need and what type of support do they need. Maybe that's referring a young person on something else, for example, if what they're looking for is not quite right for that particular service. So there's kind of using professional judgment and empowering professionals to use their judgment to decide that. So that's one thing. But the second thing is also just thinking about how do people find out that the Youth Employment Hub exists, and there's we include this in the report, but that is a major challenge at the moment. There's kind of the sort of, especially for those which are open access, so open to any young person in the local area, but very generally, awareness is really, really low. And so even those ones tend to rely on referrals from job centres. So if we're thinking about how do people find out about raising awareness, I think reaching young people from more marginalised backgrounds or from socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds, that's probably not. You probably don't necessarily want to go down the route of a website or whatever, that kind of thing. But you probably do want to think about how do you promote the Youth Employment Hub as somewhere for young people to go in the local community via community organisations and via other organisations already working with young people in the area, that kind of thing. So there's also kind of a how you promote it will also influence who turns up and who is even aware that it exists.
Thank you, Andrew. Well, look, I think we can all agree it's been a really fascinating conversation. Lots of great points, great questions. Thank you again to Andrew and to Naima for producing this excellent report. Barry and colleagues in the Youth Foundation for the wonderful partnership. Helen and Marcia for some great practical examples and experience, and just generally just providing a lot of food for thought. We continue to keep doing work on this area. I'm sure we'll be doing future research and output, so please keep checking back with us at Demos, and we'll keep taking forward some of the recommendations from this and trying to promote those to government. Part of that white paper potentially that was mentioned earlier, but also part of our general engagement work with this new government. We're also doing a piece of work which my colleague Billy standing at the back and I are working on about social mobility, which again touches on some of this issue as well, and that'll be launched towards the end of the year as well. So we might be back here having a conversation very similar to this around sort of what the role of education and training and support are for those young people. But so it's a topic that's not going to go away here at Demos. So if you're interested in doing more work with this in the future, please do get in touch. But otherwise, just can we give a round of applause to our great panel? Feel free to keep networking. We've got some more drinks and pastries and everything over here, so feel free to kind of keep the conversation going.